We all love that story of discovery, don't we? You know, the sudden flash of brilliance, the apple, Archimedes shouting Eureka.
Right, that solitary genius moment.
We really romanticize that spontaneous insight. But here's the tricky part. What happens when that flash, that intuition, needs to work across really different academic fields? We're talking interdisciplinary research. So today we're diving deep into this tension between that kind of gut feeling, the intuition, and the need for a solid, structured research process. And for you, the listener, the mission is really to see how a defined, rational process doesn't have to kill creativity. Actually, it might encourage and validate that crucial but, yeah, slippery intuitive insight.
That tension is definitely real. And, critics often frame it as this fundamental conflict, a kind of false dichotomy, as our sources put it.
Like the artist versus the engineer.
Exactly, that kind of argument, yeah. You need the artist's free flow, but the moment you bring in the engineer's plan, people worry the structure will just suffocate the art. So the resistance to defining a clear process for interdisciplinary work often comes from that fear, right? That rules stifle the breakthrough. But the argument here is the opposite. Outlining a process is essential.
Okay.
It's not about getting rid of intuition. It's about defining the playing field, really, and giving those intuitive flashes a way to be, well, integrated and tested rationally.
And what's interesting is that intuition's kind of already baked in, isn't it? Even when we talk about specific steps, like the very first step, just coming up with a research question, that's often intuition.
Absolutely.
If a scholar looks at two totally separate things and asks, what's the link between fractals and, say, Fish's argument, that's not cold logic initially.
No, that's a leap.
It's a brilliant intuitive leap, but it still fits within that rational step of identify a research question.
Precisely.
Okay, so let's unpack that leap then. If we need this structure for interdisciplinary work, where does the spontaneous great idea actually fit in?
All right.
Is it just like waiting for step 3?
Well, intuition plays a role in all scholarly work, really, period. We often focus on, physics or biology breakthroughs.
Right.
But intuition might be even more critical in areas that are harder to quantify, like trying to understand why art or literature affects us emotionally. That first question often needs empathy, an intuitive connection. And what's fascinating is that the sources pinpoint specific steps where intuition really looms large. It's not just the initial idea. It's key when you're developing a new integrative framework, pulling concepts from fields that maybe haven't spoken before. It's crucial for critiquing older research spotting biases or assumptions a purely mechanical review might miss.
Yeah, you can see that.
It's also vital for identifying completely new research paths. And even, maybe surprisingly, when doing a literature review.
Wait, a literature review? That sounds like the opposite of intuition.
Yeah.
That feels like just grinding through papers.
Yeah.
How does intuition help there?
Well, think about it. Interdisciplinary work means you're often pulling from library catalogs that weren't designed to connect, right? Your background knowledge might be patchy in one area. Your search terms might not quite hit the mark.
Okay.
Intuition is what lets you see an unexpected link. Maybe between something in a 19th century history text and a model in modern computing. It's that spark, that connection that bridges the gap where the formal systems fail.
Okay, that makes sense. But here's where it gets really interesting for me, and maybe where we often misunderstand insight. Intuition doesn't just appear out of nowhere, does it? It's not magic.
Absolutely not. No. The sources are very clear on this. These acts of insight tend to happen after long periods of, well, often agonizing conscious effort, thinking, reading, experimenting on a problem.
Right. We love the Eureka moment, but we forget the months, maybe years, of work before the bathwater overflowed.
Exactly. So those famous stories, the scientist worrying over a problem for ages, gives up, then bam, the answer hits them walking the dog.
Yeah, the park walk.
That's misleading if you only focus on the park walk. That's the insight from scholars like Beveridge back in the 50s. They weren't just waiting for inspiration. They'd consciously done the work, read everything, tried experiments, built up this, let's call it an informational package.
Okay.
When they consciously set the problem aside, they'd essentially fed their subconscious all the necessary pieces.
So the subconscious is like a background processor sort of defragging the hard drive.
That's a great way to put it, yeah. It synthesizes that huge package of information, but below the conscious level. So the real takeaway for you as a researcher is that a focused, rational process actually makes you more likely to have valuable intuitions.
Ah, right.
If you only ever walk in the park, metaphorically speaking, your subconscious has nothing to chew on. The process provides the fuel.
Fuel for the fire. Got it.
Now, we do need to pivot to the caution, though, because while intuition is foundational, relying only on it, that's strongly discouraged, and for very good reasons.
But hang on. If intuition gives us these revolutionary ideas, why put the brakes on immediately? Doesn't the rational process just invite, I don't know, bureaucracy? Doesn't it stifle the really radical stuff?
That is the critical challenge, but the answer is pretty simple, and it's rooted in, well, us, humans, our limitations. Our intuition can lead to brilliant insights, sure, but it can just as easily lead us to misguided ones.
Okay.
Ideas that just reflect our own subconscious desires, our biases, our ingrained perceptions, things that aren't about external reality. Intuition is great for generating hypotheses, but it's a terrible validator.
So trust the source of the idea, maybe, but don't trust the message until it's vetted.
That's exactly why scientists rarely talk about intuition in their official reports, isn't it? They need to persuade a skeptical community. You can't just stand up and say, hey, had a great thought in the shower, trust me.
Yeah, not very convincing.
No. The scientific conversation demands logic, evidence you can point to, even if the idea itself felt like magic when it arrived.
So the structure, the process, it isn't about generating the ideas, but about translating them.
Yes, exactly. The process forces the scholar into what we can call a crucial post hoc evaluation after the fact. You have to show how this intuitive idea connects logically to existing ideas, and crucially, how it stacks up against evidence from methods other than just intuition.
Right.
The defined steps force you to turn that flash into something testable.
That makes perfect sense. It's a filter.
Right.
But our source also stresses that this critical look shouldn't be neither too early nor overly harsh.
Yeah.
You need to give the idea a chance.
Precisely. You don't want to crush the seed immediately. The goal is structured validation, not destruction. You nurture the idea by putting it in a rational framework. That way, if it is sound, it can survive the scrutiny and, importantly, be built upon.
Built upon.
And that leads us right to the bigger picture, building on each other's work. Interdisciplinary research is just inherently more complicated than specialized work. If you're a specialist, you have a ready-made structure, a common language for evaluation. Interdisciplinarity often lacks that built-in structure, which is exactly why it needs a shared sense of how research should proceed. It provides that common ground for the community to evaluate things.
And this brings up that old challenge, doesn't it? The charge of dilettantism. Can any one person really master enough of two or more fields to do more than just skim the surface?
That's a key vulnerability, yeah. Especially since, for instance, many interdisciplinary researchers in the humanities often work alone. So if one person's insights are naturally limited, and they have to be, then it's vital that they're part of an ongoing, coherent conversation.
The process provides the structure for that conversation.
It provides the scaffolding, yes.
Yep.
It lets the community build on those individual, perhaps limited insights.
Because if we just champion the lone intuitive genius without that scaffolding, we risk chaos. Anarchy.
Mackey, a key scholar here, predicted exactly that. He warned that if interdisciplinarity is dominated only by intuition, it becomes individualized. You can't specify the method, and it's basically anarchical. And frankly, research that comes only from individual brilliance, lacking that structural validation, it's always going to be viewed with suspicion by established fields. Why? Because scholarship needs to be cumulative. It needs to build.
So if the reaction to a brilliant, intuitive paper is just, wow, great paper, now I'm inspired to do something completely different,
then the collective contribution is really limited, isn't it?
Yeah.
Without a process, the result is just, well, maybe an archival mess. A huge, scattered pile of creative works that don't actually connect.
A heap of papers and books, as the source says.
Exactly. Not a coherent body of knowledge. You need that process, encouraging detailed literature reviews, using shared methods, maybe embracing theories the original author missed to allow for that cumulative structure. That's coherent interdisciplinarity.
Now, this whole challenge of coherence, it bumps up against a pretty deep philosophical debate we should touch on. Incommensurability.
Right.
For listeners maybe not familiar, this is the idea, famously linked to Thomas Kuhn, that different academic paradigms or disciplines are built on such fundamentally different assumptions. It's like they speak different languages.
Languages without a shared alphabet, almost.
Yeah, they're incommensurable. They literally can't measure things by the same standard, maybe can't even truly communicate core concepts.
And if you really believe disciplines are totally incommensurable, then proper interdisciplinary work is basically impossible. Your only option is intuition, which leads straight back to that archival mess. But our sources here firmly side with those who dispute that absolute view. They argue communication is always possible, even across deep divides, though the risks of misunderstanding are, well, huge. Legion.
And that's why the process acts as the bridge. It's the structured way to translate concepts, trying to minimize that risk of misunderstanding. It lets scholars check the limits of that cross-disciplinary talk.
Exactly right. The process forces you, even when you're borrowing a tool, say a sociologist using a physics technique, to clearly explain why that tool works here in this new context and validate it.
Okay, so that brings us full circle. Really, it clarifies the mission. The main takeaway seems clear. A rational, step-by-step process for interdisciplinary research isn't just nice to have, it's necessary. For credibility, for coherence, for actually building something lasting.
Yes, but, and this is the crucial part, this process actively encourages and validates that individual intuition. It doesn't suppress it.
Right.
It acts as the structured environment that feeds the subconscious, gives it the fuel we talked about, and then critically, it gives the resulting idea the mechanism it needs to survive scrutiny, to thrive, and actually add to the community's knowledge.
So what's the final thought then for the researcher listening who's maybe tempted by interdisciplinary work, but feels a bit lost about how to even begin?
Well, what really stands out is the practical application bit. The suggestion that to help the community really nurture and build on intuition, interdisciplinarians should be actively encouraged to reflect on and even report how they do their research.
Not just the results.
Not just the final findings, no, but the methodology of discovery itself. Maybe in a special section or an appendix. How did they get there? What were the intuitive leaps? How were they tested?
Making the process transparent. That's key, isn't it?
It really is. If we make the process of discovery, including the intuitive sparks and the rational follow-through visible, then we all gain a better understanding. We learn how to both nurture our own insights and build on others.
So it becomes a guide.
Precisely. A necessary guide for others tempted by this really important work, but who maybe just don't have a clear map for getting started. It helps everyone build that cumulative structure together.